In the austere confines of the Los Angeles County Courthouse, an unexpected drama was about to unfold. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors of courtroom 7A. It was supposed to be a routine day of traffic violations and minor infractions, but what transpired would soon become a testament to the dangers of making assumptions about a person's intelligence based on their appearance. Judge Margaret Henderson sat at her bench, her black robes crisp and her expression stern as she surveyed her morning docket. At 65, she had earned a reputation for being particularly strict about courthouse decorum, especially when it came to religious displays in her courtroom. Some whispered that her stringent interpretation of the separation of church and state bordered on zealotry. The bailiff's voice rang out clear and firm. Case number 2023 TR 789, City of Los Angeles vs. Dominic Toretto. The name on the docket was an alias that Vin Diesel often used in legal matters, a subtle nod to his most famous character that usually went unnoticed by court officials. When Vin Diesel walked into the courtroom, heads turned. At 56 years old, his muscular frame filled out his charcoal gray suit perfectly, but what caught everyone's attention was the silver cross hanging prominently around his neck, the same cross he had worn for decades, a symbol of his deep-rooted faith and connection to his adoptive father. Judge Henderson's eyes narrowed at the sight of the religious symbol. She had made headlines before for demanding that witnesses remove any visible religious jewelry before testifying, claiming it could unduly influence the jury. Today, there was no jury present, but her disdain was palpable. The charge was simple: excessive speed on Mulholland Drive. Under normal circumstances, it would have been handled with a fine and a stern warning. But as Vin approached the podium, Judge Henderson's focus remained fixed on the cross glinting in the morning light. "Mr. Toretto," she began, her voice carrying the weight of authority, "before we proceed, I must ask you to remove that religious symbol. This is a court of law, not a house of worship." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The few present, mostly others waiting for their traffic cases to be called, shifted in their seats, sensing the tension building in the air. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype, knowing this exchange might be something worth capturing with particular attention. Vin's response was calm, his deep voice resonating through the courtroom with the same gravelly timbre that had made him famous. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I am exercising my First Amendment right to religious expression. This cross has profound personal significance to me." Judge Henderson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Toretto, let me be clear. You will either remove that cross, or I will hold you in contempt of court and add a significant fine to whatever penalty your traffic violation warrants." What the judge didn't know was that before becoming an actor, before the Fast and Furious franchise made him a household name, Vin Diesel had been a dedicated student of legal theory. During his early struggling years as an actor in New York, he had spent countless hours in the public library, devouring books on constitutional law and civil rights. It had been more than just a hobby, it was his way of understanding the systems of power and justice that shaped society. "Your Honor," he began again, his tone respectful but firm, "I would like to cite the Supreme Court case of Good News Club versus Milford Central School, 533 U.S. 98, 2001. Which established that viewpoint discrimination against religious expression violates the First Amendment's free speech clause." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained stern. "Mr. Toretto, this is a traffic court, not a constitutional law seminar. Remove the cross, or face the consequences." Vin stood his ground, his presence commanding but not confrontational. "Then I must also reference Capitol Square Review and Advisory Board versus Panett, 515 U.S. 753, 1995, which held that private religious expression in a public forum is protected speech. This courtroom, as a public forum for justice, falls under that protection." A young law clerk in the corner of the courtroom had begun frantically Googling the cases on his phone, his eyes widening as he realized that the actor was citing the precedents correctly and in context. Judge Henderson's face had begun to redden. "Mr. Toretto, are you attempting to lecture me on constitutional law?" "No, Your Honor," Vin replied, his voice taking on the same quiet intensity that had made his film performances so compelling. I am merely exercising my right to protect my constitutional freedoms. I would also draw your attention to Church of the Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah, 508 U.S. 520, 1993, which established that government officials cannot target religious expression for distinctive treatment. The gallery had grown completely silent. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype, capturing every word of this unexpected legal discourse. Even the bailiff had taken a step closer, intrigued by the unfolding scene. Judge Henderson shifted in her seat, her authority visibly shaken. It was clear she hadn't expected a Hollywood action star to come armed with Supreme Court precedents. Mr. Toretto, while your legal knowledge is unexpected, this court has the authority to maintain its decorum as it sees fit. With respect, Your Honor, Vin countered, reaching into his suit jacket to produce a printed document, I have here the California Rules of Court, which specifically protect religious expression that does not interfere with court proceedings. My cross is a personal expression of faith, not a disruption to these proceedings. The young law clerk had by now made his way to the judge's bench and was whispering urgently in her ear, confirming that every case citation and legal principle Vin had mentioned was accurately stated and relevant to the situation. The gallery watched in fascination as the power dynamic in the courtroom slowly shifted. Judge Henderson, known for her ironclad control of her courtroom, found herself in the unusual position of being professionally challenged, not by a seasoned attorney, but by an action movie star who had apparently spent his spare time becoming well-versed in constitutional law. Furthermore, Vin continued, his voice never rising but carrying an undeniable authority, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 requires that any government burden on religious expression must be both in furtherance of a compelling government interest and must be the least restrictive means of furthering that interest. I would respectfully suggest that demanding the removal of a personal religious symbol meets neither of these criteria. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Henderson's face had progressed from red to an interesting shade of purple, but her legal training was forcing her to recognize the validity of his arguments. The law clerk continued to whisper confirmations in her ear, each one seeming to deflate her authority a little more. In that moment, Vin Diesel stood not just as an actor, but as a symbol of something larger, the unexpected depths that lay beneath surface appearances, the power of knowledge wielded with respect, and the importance of standing up for one's principles with dignity rather than anger. Judge Henderson finally spoke, her voice noticeably less confident than before. Mr. Toretto, your legal arguments are well-researched and pertinent. She paused, visibly struggling with what she had to say next. The court withdraws its demand regarding your religious symbol. A quiet murmur of approval rippled through the gallery. The court reporter smiled slightly as she continued to record every word. This was definitely not the typical traffic court transcript. Now, the judge continued, trying to regain some measure of control regarding the matter of your speed on Mulholland Drive. Yes, Your Honor, Vin responded smoothly, producing another document from his jacket. I believe I can address that as well. I have here radar calibration records from the traffic division which show that the particular unit used in my citation was overdue for its monthly calibration by 17 days. The morning sun continued to stream through the courthouse windows, illuminating a scene that would soon become a legend in legal circles. The day an action movie star gave an impromptu constitutional law lecture in traffic court, all while defending his right to wear a simple silver cross. And as the judge reluctantly dismissed his traffic citation based on the radar calibration evidence, the cross gleamed in the sunlight, a symbol not just of faith, but of the unexpected depths that lie within each person, waiting for the right moment to shine. News of what transpired in Courtroom 7A spread through the Los Angeles County Courthouse like wildfire. By lunchtime, the morning's events had taken on an almost mythical quality, with courthouse staff and attorneys gathering in small groups to discuss how an action movie star had transformed a routine traffic hearing into a masterclass on constitutional law. In her chambers, Judge Margaret Henderson sat behind her massive oak desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she pored over the cases Vin Diesel had cited. Her clerk, David Chin, stood nervously nearby, holding a stack of printouts from various legal databases. Everything he said was correct, David confirmed, his voice carrying a note of admiration. Not just the case citations, but the application of the principles to the specific situation. It's the kind of legal reasoning you'd expect from a constitutional law professor, not from the star of the Fast and the Furious, Judge Henderson finished, removing her glasses with a sigh. The morning's events had shaken her more than she cared to admit. In 20 years on the bench, she had never been so thoroughly and respectfully schooled in constitutional law. Meanwhile, in the courthouse cafeteria, Vin Diesel sat quietly at a corner table, sipping coffee and reviewing some papers for his next project. The silver cross still hung prominently around his neck, catching the fluorescent light. Other diners tried to steal glances without being obvious, whispering among themselves about what they'd heard. A young public defender, Sarah Rodriguez, finally gathered the courage to approach his table. "Mr. Diesel," she began hesitantly, "I was in the gallery this morning. Your handling of First Amendment jurisprudence was incredible. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" Vin looked up with a warm smile, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Please, sit down. And call me Vin." His deep voice carried the same gentle authority it had in the courtroom, but now with an added note of warmth. As Sarah took her seat, others in the cafeteria gradually drew closer, trying to listen without being too obvious. Vin noticed but didn't comment, maintaining his focus on the young lawyer before him. "I have to ask," Sarah continued, her professional curiosity overcoming her initial starstruck hesitation, "how does an action movie star become so well-versed in constitutional law?" Vin's eyes took on a distant look, as if seeing back through the years. "Before I found success in Hollywood, I spent a lot of time in the New York Public Library. I was working as a bouncer at the time, but during the days, I'd sit there reading everything I could get my hands on. Law fascinated me, especially constitutional law. It's really the story of how we try to balance power and justice, rights and responsibilities." He touched the silver cross thoughtfully. "This cross was a gift from my adoptive father. When I wear it, I'm not just expressing my faith, I'm honoring him, honoring family. The law protects that kind of deep personal meaning, and I believe it's important to understand those protections." Word of Vin's impromptu legal seminar in the cafeteria began to spread. More lawyers and courthouse staff drifted over, drawn by the unusual sight of an action star discussing complex legal principles over courthouse coffee. "But how did you remember all those cases so precisely?" another lawyer asked. "Even practicing attorneys sometimes need to look up the exact citations." Vin's smile widened slightly. "The same way I memorize movie scripts, dedication and practice. When something matters to you, you take the time to learn it thoroughly. I've always believed that education isn't just about formal schooling, it's about having a genuine curiosity about the world." Back in her chambers, Judge Henderson had moved from reading case law to watching clips from Vin's movies on her computer. Her clerk tried to hide his amusement as the stern judge studied the action scenes with an almost academic intensity. "It's remarkable," she muttered, more to herself than to David. "We see someone in action movies, and we make assumptions about their intellectual capacity. We forget that acting is a choice, not a limitation." The morning's events had triggered something of a crisis of conscience for the judge. For years, she had prided herself on her strict interpretation of the separation of church and state. But had she gone too far? Had her zeal to maintain the neutrality of her courtroom led her to infringe on the very constitutional rights she had sworn to protect? In the cafeteria, the informal gathering around Vin's table had grown into something resembling a legal symposium. Lawyers from various departments listened intently as he discussed other cases involving religious expression in public spaces. "The interesting thing about the Good News Club decision," he was saying, "is how it highlighted the difference between government speech and private speech in a public forum. When I wear this cross, I'm engaging in private speech. The government can't restrict that without a compelling interest and narrow tailoring." Sarah Rodriguez was taking notes furiously. "This is better than my constitutional law class in law school," she commented, earning knowing nods from her colleagues. The courthouse security guards, who had initially been concerned about the growing crowd in the cafeteria, now stood back respectfully, also listening. One of them, a veteran officer named Mike Johnson, couldn't help but smile at the surreal scene, one of Hollywood's biggest action stars teaching constitutional law to a room full of lawyers. As the lunch hour drew to a close, Vin stood to leave, causing a stir of disappointment among his impromptu students. But before he could make his exit, a court clerk rushed up with an unexpected message. Judge Henderson was requesting his presence in her chambers. The crowd parted as Vin made his way through the courthouse corridors, the cross still gleaming against his dark suit. Lawyers and staff who had heard about the morning's events stopped to watch him pass, some offering quiet words of support or admiration. Judge Henderson's chambers were exactly what one would expect: wall-to-wall law books, certificates of achievement, and the somber atmosphere of serious legal contemplation. The judge stood as Vin entered, her expression markedly different from the stern disapproval she had shown in the courtroom. "Mr. Toretto, or should I say Mr. Diesel?" she began, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit down. I believe I owe you an apology." Vin sat quietly, his presence filling the room without overwhelming it. "No apology necessary, Your Honor. You were doing what you believed was right to protect the neutrality of your courtroom." "Perhaps," she replied, removing her glasses again, a gesture that her clerk had learned indicated deep thought. "But in doing so, I lost sight of something fundamental. The separation of church and state is meant to protect religious freedom, not suppress it. Your legal arguments this morning were illuminating." A small smile played at the corners of Vin's mouth. "Thank you, Your Honor. Though I have to admit, I didn't expect to be giving a constitutional law lecture in traffic court today." "Neither did I," the judge chuckled, surprising her clerk with this rare display of humor. "Tell me, Mr. Diesel, given your obvious knowledge of the law, have you ever considered a more formal legal education?" "Life has taken me down a different path," Vin replied, touching his cross again. "But I believe knowledge doesn't need formal credentials to be valuable. Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected sources." Judge Henderson nodded slowly. "A lesson I was reminded of rather forcefully this morning." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "I've been known to be rather strict about religious symbols in my courtroom. Perhaps it's time I reviewed that policy in light of the constitutional principles you so eloquently outlined." The afternoon sun had begun to slant through the chamber's windows, creating a warm glow that seemed to soften the formal atmosphere. In that light, judge and actor sat not as representatives of their respective professions, but as two people sharing a moment of mutual respect and understanding. "Your Honor," Vin said finally, "may I share something my adoptive father told me when he gave me this cross? He said that symbols are powerful not because of what they are, but because of what they mean to the heart that holds them dear. The Constitution protects that meaning, that personal truth." Judge Henderson was quiet for a long moment, looking at the man before her with new eyes. Gone was her preconception of the action star, replaced by recognition of a thoughtful, educated individual who had chosen to express himself through film but had never stopped pursuing knowledge. "Mr. Diesel," she said at last, "I think you've taught more than constitutional law today. You've reminded us all not to judge books by their covers, or actors by their roles." As Vin stood to leave, Judge Henderson had one final question. "The cases you cited, you knew them all by heart. But why take the time to learn constitutional law so thoroughly?" Vin paused at the door, his expression thoughtful. "Because understanding our rights is as important as exercising them. And sometimes, the best way to fight prejudice is with knowledge rather than anger." As he left the chambers, his cross catching the late afternoon light, the judge turned to her clerk. "David, I want you to prepare a memo reviewing our courthouse policies on religious expression. It's time we ensured our practices align with both the letter and the spirit of the Constitution." The story of what happened in courtroom 7A that morning would be told and retold throughout the legal community. But perhaps its greatest impact was not in the legal principles discussed, but in the reminder that wisdom and knowledge can come from unexpected sources, and that true strength lies not in authority, but in the respectful exchange of ideas and understanding. By the following morning, what had started as courthouse gossip had evolved into a viral sensation. Someone in the gallery had recorded part of the exchange on their phone, and the video was spreading across social media platforms with remarkable speed. The sight of Vin Diesel calmly citing Supreme Court precedents while defending his right to wear a cross had struck a chord with people far beyond the legal community. In the bustling newsroom of the Los Angeles Times, veteran legal affairs reporter Michael Chin sat at his desk, surrounded by printouts of social media responses and court transcripts. His editor had initially been skeptical about dedicating significant space to what seemed like a celebrity traffic court appearance. But as Chen dug deeper into the story, he discovered layers that went far beyond mere entertainment news. It's not just about Vin Diesel knowing constitutional law, Chen explained to his editor during their morning meeting. It's about challenging our assumptions about celebrities, about religious expression, and about the intersection of popular culture and serious scholarship. Meanwhile, at the USC Law School, Professor Sarah Goldstein was starting her First Amendment class with a discussion of the previous day's events. The classroom was packed, with students from other departments squeezing in to hear about the Hollywood star who had turned a traffic court into a constitutional law seminar. What Mr. Diesel demonstrated yesterday, Professor Goldstein began, was not just knowledge of case law, but a deep understanding of how constitutional principles apply to real-world situations. His citation of Good News Club versus Milford Central School was particularly apparent. In her office at the courthouse, Judge Henderson found herself fielding calls from judicial colleagues across the country. Some were supportive, others concerned about the precedent of a judge being challenged on constitutional grounds in traffic court. But all were interested in how this might affect policies on religious expression in courtrooms nationwide. "The truth is," she admitted to a colleague in Boston, "this incident has forced me to re-examine some long-held positions. When did our dedication to maintaining secular courts cross the line into infringing on personal religious expression?" The video had also caught the attention of legal advocacy groups. The American Civil Liberties Union issued a statement praising both the substantive legal arguments and the respectful manner in which they were presented. Religious freedom organizations began citing the incident as an example of how to effectively defend First Amendment rights without escalating confrontation. At his home in the Hollywood Hills, Vin Diesel was going through his morning routine, the same silver cross hanging from his neck as he read through the flood of messages on his phone. His publicist had been inundated with requests for interviews, not from entertainment reporters, but from legal journals and educational publications. One message in particular caught his attention, an invitation to speak at Harvard Law School's Symposium on Religious Freedom and Public Spaces. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent countless hours in libraries reading about constitutional law, and now prestigious law schools wanted to hear his thoughts on the subject. His phone rang. It was his old friend and fellow actor Dwayne Johnson. "Brother," The Rock's familiar voice boomed through the speaker, "I just watched the video. Why didn't you ever tell me about your legal expertise?" Vin smiled as he looked out over the Los Angeles skyline. "It never came up in our action scenes," he replied with a chuckle. "Besides, everyone has depths that others don't expect. You're a perfect example of that." The conversation turned serious as Dwayne mentioned the impact the video was having. "You know what people are saying? They're saying you've given them courage to stand up for their beliefs, not with anger or confrontation, but with knowledge and respect." Back at the courthouse, Sarah Rodriguez, the young public defender who had approached Vin in the cafeteria, was preparing for a case involving religious accommodation in the workplace. She found herself reviewing her arguments with a new perspective, incorporating some of the principles Vin had discussed. "Your Honor," she began her presentation in a different courtroom, "as we saw demonstrated just yesterday in this very courthouse, the expression of personal faith through symbols neither disrupts judicial proceedings nor infringes on the separation of church and state." The impact continued to ripple outward. Law professors began incorporating the incident into their lesson plans. Constitutional law students found themselves discussing how a Fast and Furious star had provided a real-world example of First Amendment principles in action. Even late-night talk show hosts picked up the story. "Who knew," one joked, "that Dom Toretto was secretly Perry Mason? Turns out he's been racing through law books as well as streets." But beneath the humor and viral popularity, something more significant was taking place. The incident had sparked a national conversation about assumptions, education, and the unexpected ways knowledge can manifest itself. At a small diner near the courthouse, two elderly judges were having lunch, discussing the changes Judge Henderson was proposing to the courthouse policies on religious expression. "You know what impresses me most?" one said to the other. "It's not just that he knew the law. It's that he presented his argument with such respect and dignity. No grandstanding, no confrontation, just clear, well-reasoned legal argument." The other judge nodded in agreement. "It's a reminder that knowledge without wisdom is like a car without a driver." He had both. In law firms across the city, attorneys were having similar conversations. The incident had become a case study in effective legal argumentation. Some firms even began using the video as a training tool for young lawyers, highlighting the importance of maintaining composure and respect while presenting constitutional arguments. At the New York Public Library, where Vin had spent those early years studying law, the staff had created a small display featuring books on constitutional law and religious freedom. A photo of Vin Diesel, taken from the viral courtroom video, was accompanied by a quote about the importance of self-education and intellectual curiosity. The story had also reached religious communities across the country. Faith leaders praised not just the defense of religious expression, but the way it had been defended, with knowledge, respect, and dignity rather than anger or confrontation. By late afternoon, Judge Henderson had finished drafting her revised guidelines for religious expression in the courthouse. The new policies carefully balanced the need for judicial neutrality with respect for personal religious freedom. She had included a quote from Vin's courtroom statement about private religious expression in public forums. "It's remarkable," she commented to her clerk as she reviewed the final draft. "Sometimes it takes an unexpected voice to help us see familiar issues in a new light." The clerk, who had witnessed the entire incident, nodded in agreement. "It's like what Mr. Diesel said about education not needing formal credentials to be valuable. He might not have a law degree, but his understanding of constitutional principles was profound." As the day drew to a close, the story continued to spread, taking on new dimensions. Social media was filled with people sharing their own stories of being underestimated or judged by appearances. The hashtag #Don'tJudgeAbook was trending, with many posts referencing Vin's unexpected legal expertise. In his home office, Vin was reviewing the Harvard Law School invitation. The symposium would focus on the intersection of popular culture and constitutional rights, a topic he had never expected to help shape. His silver cross caught the light as he reached for a pen to write his response. The phone rang again. This time it was his adoptive father, the man who had given him the cross years ago. "I saw the video," the older man said, his voice thick with emotion. "You defended not just your right to wear the cross, but everything it represents: faith, family, the courage to stand up for what you believe in." Vin touched the cross gently. "I learned that from you," he replied. "You taught me that standing up for your beliefs doesn't mean you have to stand against others. Sometimes the strongest defense is simply knowing and understanding your rights." As night fell over Los Angeles, the story of the action star who had become an unexpected constitutional law expert continued to resonate. It wasn't just about religious freedom or legal knowledge. It was about the surprising depths that exist within each person, waiting for the right moment to emerge. In her chambers, Judge Henderson placed the final copy of the new guidelines in her outbox. On her desk lay a small silver cross, a gift from her grandmother that she had stopped wearing years ago in her zeal to maintain strict courthouse neutrality. Perhaps, she thought, it was time to reconsider more than just courthouse policies. The incident had become more than just a viral moment or a legal curiosity. It had become a reminder that education comes in many forms, that wisdom can wear unexpected faces, and that sometimes the most powerful arguments are made not with volume or force, but with knowledge, respect, and quiet dignity. And somewhere in the courthouse archives, in the transcript of a routine traffic court session, lay the record of the day when an action movie star reminded everyone that true strength often lies not in flexing muscles, but in exercising wisdom and understanding. 3 months after the courthouse incident, the Harvard Law School auditorium was filled to capacity. Students, Professors, legal scholars, and media representatives sat shoulder to shoulder, all eager to hear the keynote speaker at the symposium on Popular Culture and Constitutional Rights in Modern America. Vin Diesel stood at the podium, the familiar silver cross gleaming against his suit. The same quiet confidence that had marked his courtroom appearance now filled the prestigious hall. But this wasn't a performance. This was about something deeper than acting or entertainment. "When I spent those days in the New York Public Library," he began, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I wasn't studying law to become a lawyer. I was studying it to understand the framework of justice that shapes our society. Knowledge, I believed then and believe now, isn't about credentials, it's about curiosity and dedication." In the audience, Judge Henderson sat next to her clerk, David Chin. She had flown in specifically for this event, her own perspective on religious expression and judicial authority having evolved significantly over the past months. The courthouse guidelines she had revised had been adopted by several other jurisdictions, sparking a broader conversation about religious freedom in public spaces. The intersection of popular culture and constitutional rights isn't just an academic discussion, Vin continued. It's about how we navigate our principles in everyday life. When I defended my right to wear this cross in traffic court, I wasn't just citing case law, I was standing up for the belief that our constitutional rights don't exist only in textbooks. The audience listened intently as he shared more about his self-education journey. He spoke about the hours spent reading legal texts between bouncer shifts, about the parallels between acting and legal argumentation, about the importance of understanding the principles that protect individual rights. "In the Fast and Furious franchise," he said with a slight smile, "we often talk about family. But family isn't just about blood relations, it's about the bonds we forge through understanding and respect. In that courtroom, when I defended my right to wear this cross, I was defending not just my personal freedom of expression, but the principle that we can disagree while still respecting each other's rights." Sarah Rodriguez, the young public defender from Los Angeles, was also in attendance. She had been invited to participate in a panel discussion about the practical applications of constitutional principles in daily legal practice. Her own career had taken an unexpected turn after the courthouse incident, as she had become increasingly involved in religious freedom cases. "What Mr. Diesel demonstrated that day," she would later say in her panel presentation, "wasn't just knowledge of the law. It was an understanding of how to apply that knowledge with wisdom and respect. That's something they don't always teach in law school." The symposium had drawn participants from various fields, law enforcement officers discussing the balance between security and religious expression, educators exploring how to teach constitutional principles through real-world examples, and religious leaders examining the intersection of faith and public life. "The beauty of our constitutional system," Vin continued, "is that it protects both the right to believe and the right not to believe. The separation of church and state isn't about erasing religion from public life, it's about ensuring that government neither promotes nor inhibits religious expression." In the months since the courthouse incident, Vin had received thousands of messages from people sharing their own stories of standing up for their rights through knowledge rather than confrontation. Many spoke of how his example had inspired them to learn more about their constitutional rights, to approach conflicts with understanding rather than anger. "Education," he said, touching his cross thoughtfully, "comes in many forms. This cross was a gift from my adoptive father, but it represents more than just religious faith. It represents the belief that knowledge, combined with respect, is the strongest foundation for defending our rights." The impact of the traffic court incident had extended far beyond legal circles. High schools had incorporated the video into their civics lessons. Religious organizations had used it as an example of how to advocate for rights without antagonism. Even Hollywood had been affected, with several studios developing projects about unlikely constitutional scholars. But perhaps the most important lesson, Vin continued, is that we should never assume we know the depths of another person's knowledge or understanding. The action star might be a constitutional scholar. The judge might need to re-examine her assumptions. The traffic court might become a classroom for constitutional principles. Judge Henderson nodded slightly at these words, remembering her own journey of realization. Her revised courthouse guidelines had become a model for other courts, demonstrating how to balance religious freedom with judicial neutrality. In the end, Vin said, approaching his conclusion, this isn't just about one actor knowing constitutional law, or one judge reconsidering her position, or one courtroom incident going viral. It's about recognizing that knowledge and wisdom can come from unexpected sources, and that the strongest defense of our rights often comes through understanding and respect rather than confrontation. The aftermath of the courthouse incident had led to concrete changes. Law schools had begun incorporating more real-world applications into their constitutional law courses. Courthouses across the country had reviewed their policies on religious expression. And perhaps most importantly, people had been inspired to learn more about their rights and how to defend them effectively. I stand before you today, Vin said, not as an actor playing a role, but as someone who believes in the power of knowledge to bridge divides and protect rights. The library where I studied law had a quote on its wall, "Knowledge is power." But I would add to that, knowledge with respect is transformation. As he concluded his speech, the applause was immediate and sustained. But more meaningful than the applause were the discussions that followed, law students talking about their own journeys of discovery, judges sharing experiences of reconsidering long-held positions, activists discussing how to advocate for rights through education rather than confrontation. In the reception that followed, Judge Henderson approached Vin with a small package. "I wanted you to have this," she said, opening the box to reveal a gavel. "It's the one I used that day in traffic court. Let it be a reminder that sometimes justice comes through unexpected channels." Vin accepted the gift with characteristic grace. "Thank you, Your Honor. Though I hope you'll continue using other gavels for many years to come." The judge smiled. "Oh, I will. But with a better understanding of the rights I'm protecting. You taught me that day that protecting the separation of church and state doesn't mean suppressing individual religious expression." As the evening drew to a close, participants lingered, reluctant to end the conversations that had sprung up throughout the day. Law students asked Vin about his study techniques. Judges discussed the balance between maintaining order and protecting rights. Religious leaders shared stories of advocating for freedom of expression through education rather than confrontation. The silver cross still gleamed at Vin's neck, no longer a source of controversy but a symbol of how knowledge and respect could transform conflict into understanding. The traffic court incident had become more than just a viral moment or a legal curiosity. It had become a catalyst for examining how we protect rights, challenge assumptions, and learn from unexpected teachers. As Vin prepared to leave, a young law student approached him with one final question. "What would you say to someone who feels intimidated by the law, who thinks it's too complex for them to understand?" Vin touched his cross thoughtfully before responding. "I would tell them what I learned in that public library years ago, that understanding your rights is not about memorizing cases or earning degrees. It's about having the curiosity to learn and the wisdom to apply that knowledge with respect. Every one of us has the capacity to be both a student and a teacher of justice." The legacy of that traffic court morning continued to ripple outward, touching lives and changing perspectives. It served as a reminder that education comes in many forms, that wisdom can wear unexpected faces, and that sometimes the most powerful defense of our rights comes not through force or confrontation, but through knowledge, understanding, and respect. And somewhere in the Harvard Law School archives, next to the transcript of Vin's keynote address, the story would be preserved, not just as a curious intersection of popular culture and constitutional law, but as a testament to the power of knowledge to transform conflict into understanding and assumptions into wisdom.